Hello, welcome to the Wellness and Career Preparation for the Dancer webinar series. My name is Danashanti Harter Johnson, and I am one of the professors at Saddleback College. Today's webinar is the development of a personalized body maintenance routine. What we are looking at in this class today online is how do you make sure that your body is completely prepared and ready for whatever activity you might be doing for the day. If you're going to a class, it's always good to give your body a little bit of a movement and warm up before you get fully involved in the class itself. Although a teacher will definitely warm you up, you also want to make sure that you're thoughtful about what your needs are. It's always important to think about what things might take a little bit longer to warm up, what might be perfect, and what other things might need a little bit of attention for the day. It also might be that if you have a rehearsal for the day, how do you make sure that you're warming up properly for that rehearsal so that you can avoid any possibility of strains to your body or a body injury. We want to make sure that we're always thinking, how do we most efficiently get ready and prepared for whatever it is that activity requires from us. In addition, in this webinar, we'll be talking a little bit about a cool down. Not all professors or teachers are able to give a huge amount of time to a cool down process, and same as your warm-up, it might need to be much more individualized. So what we'll talk about is how do you decide and discover what things you might need to pay attention to when you're in that cool down. We want to think about how these different things are important for whichever class type or whatever kind of dance genre you might be working on. Things require different elements of warmth, but it's important that we always consider our body will need to have some maintenance, whether at the beginning or at the end of our activity. One of the other most important things to think about when we're really thinking about our own personal body maintenance routine is that we want to make sure that we are getting an adequate amount of sleep. I know it can be so difficult with so many things that we have available that we need to do classes, and we have rehearsals, and we have work, and we have all these different things, but we want to make sure that we are getting an adequate amount of sleep. Also, some time for relaxation, some time to bring yourself back in and really focus on letting your mind relax, your body relax, and have a moment of clarity. Also, absolutely most important when we are talking about lots of activity, physical activity, is we want to make sure that we are thinking about our water intake. We want to make sure that we are getting enough water that when it is going out, we're also getting it back in. So really making sure that you are staying hydrated throughout. So one of the things we want to really think about is what type of genre of dance we are going to be participating in for that day. We want to think specifically about what are the major muscle groups that are going to be required to be fully active. All dance forms are going to need to have a general warm-up too. So all dance forms, even if I talk about one isolated area of the body, there are always still the need for a general warmth. Our core is going to be engaged in every type of dance form. Our arms and our back is also going to be important, but there are some dance forms where maybe our arms and our shoulders need a little extra warmth, and there are other dance forms that might need a little extra warmth in your legs or your feet. So you just want to start thinking about what kind of activity will I be doing today? What kind of activity will I require to have be particularly warm when I am doing this particular genre? An example would be, if I were to go into a ballet class, I want to make sure that my core is really thinking about already being engaged. Sometimes in a ballet class, it's one of the last things we think about, but it's one of the most important things for everything else to be able to move. So we want to check in that just a reminder to your body that core is fully engaged. In another example, maybe if we were to go into a tap class or into a tap rehearsal, we would really want to make sure that our ankles and our feet and our legs are really getting that little extra warmth to make sure that I am fully and completely prepared for that class or activity. We will go through many of these things, and I'll give you some examples of things that you may want to think about when you are deciding how you're going to approach your warm-up. But one of the other things, as I stated, is that you want to make sure that there is a general warmth within your body. So you might want to come in, if you've been very tired for the day, you might want to come in and sit, and that is somewhat okay. But I would suggest that maybe you start with a slight centering type of activity. Then you get up and you will move around. Now that's not moving around like as in dancing or kicking your legs out and things like that. It's that you want to start like moving, and again, get that idea of the heart rate is going, okay? So an example of sort of coming into a class, you're feeling very tired from the day and you say, I just need to center myself. Okay, so the first thing you can do is you can lay down on the floor and you can put your feet up, and we can take the heels slightly out and put the toes slightly together. This will allow for our knees to come towards each other and rest. In this position, you're trying to just let your spine feel the length of the floor. You can either take those arms out to the side, or you may want to cross them across, feeling where your shoulders are, your elbows are together, and they can actually go kind of place up against your head so that they just have a nice relaxed feeling. The other place they could do is downward towards your body. This is a resting position, and it's a really good position to kind of get a sense of the day, to get a sense of how are you going to make this become your best class, your best activity. So that's the first thing you might want to do. Spend a couple of moments in that position. Center yourself, get yourself in a good place to continue with your activity. After that, you may want to get up, and again, you might want to start with a gentle walk around. You may do a little bit of a jog. As you're doing that, especially since we're thinking about dancing, you may want to roll through your feet. So instead of like an actual full jogging, you may want to think about rolling through the foot. But again, just kind of a little gentle feeling of activity. You could also swing your arms, bend your knees, and start thinking about, again, what you're checking in with is that you're getting a little bit of a fire inside your body. You're trying to think of enlivening it and getting it activated. So this can be very free form, this type of just a little bit of moving. You can even start to swing your legs just ever so slightly. But again, you want to think in progression, so that you're not going full to your biggest giant kick, or you're not doing a big giant jump. You're thinking of, you're getting yourself activated. You can even hear within myself and the way that I'm speaking, I'm starting to get just a tiny bit of a breathlessness. So that's good. That's where you want to start to kind of get to, where you start feeling there's this enlivened energy within your body. Once you have achieved that, where you feel like, okay, I have a little bit more, now I might want to start thinking about those particular activities that I'm about to participate in, and think about focusing on those particular muscle groups. If we were going to be doing a tap activity or class or rehearsal for the day, I'm going to be thinking about my legs in general. Again, as I will continue to state, we always still want to think about our core. We do want to think about how our shoulders are going to be involved. We want to think about how our neck is involved, and we most definitely want to check in with our breath. But when we are thinking about tap itself, we're making sounds with our feet. So we're going to need some both loosened moments with our body, as well as moments of engagement. So we want to check in that those things are ready for either the relaxed looseness or the full engagement. So a couple of ideas, a couple of thoughts to do in terms of your feet and then moving up through your body is you might want to take, if you can If you feel you need, you can have your hands on a wall, or if you have some sort of a space where there's something to hold on to. If you want to just relax and do some circles of the feet, once they start feeling a little bit more energized, maybe you do some flexing and pointing. Once that starts feeling like there's activity, you might want to bend your knees so that you're getting into your calves. You can also slide one foot back, and you can start thinking about how that will also increase a little bit more into your calves. Okay, when we think about our calves, we're thinking about our gastrocnemius as well as our soleus. And we want to be thinking about those muscle groups are going to be engaging and also relaxing throughout our time in our work in TAP. We also can start thinking about if you have a wall to put your foot against. If you're feeling like that was a good activity, but you also didn't quite get enough, you may do where you're pressing it against. There's two things you want to think about. Both your toes, those extensors are going to be an important thing to make sure that we're getting worked into and start stretching them out. Then we can also do a little bit more where it's a little bit more flexed, so that again, we're getting into those calf muscles. So we want to spend a little bit of time in each of these. We can start with some ideas of static stretching and then move into dynamic stretching. So we've done a little bit of that by just getting the energy and the body warmth, but we also want to think about having a few moments where you can just stretch either those toes or your calves. And then we also want to check in. We might want to bend and stretch a couple of times to get into the quads. As you start feeling that energy going, you may want to take one foot and put it up and get into that front of the quad. When we have our quadriceps, we're thinking about 4 different muscles. So what we want to try to think about is that anytime we move a small part of your body, so if I were to be here and I take my hips slightly back, I'm going to have a little bit of a different stretch. If I take it slightly front, I'm also going to have a different stretch. I may also want to think just the teeniest tiny bit where I'm rotating ever so slightly from the top of the hip and thinking about rotating that out. That's also going to give me a slightly different stretch. Same if I just gently pull that heel out so that the leg rotates inward. I'm going to give different sides. I'm going to help those get a little bit more of a stretch. So also think that when you are working on your stretching, that it's not one place that is going to be where we want to stop and stay. We actually want to feel a little tiny bit as we go. One of the things that's really important is always being safe with how you are stretching, making sure that there isn't anything that's causing you pain. There is always just that feeling of lengthening and feeling of engagement, but we want to make sure that if there's that feeling of pain, we return from that. So you want to check in, always pay attention to how those muscle groups are feeling, how they're being engaged. Another thing you might want to think about in terms of legs, okay, and these are all things that could be any time that you're in particularly thinking about legs, is you may want to do a couple of floor stretches. You can take your feet out in front of you, and you can even take your big toe and just slightly and gently pull across. You may even do it in a more of a pointed position. You can do it more of a flexed position, and you're just gently trying to get to that side, the outside of the foot. You may do the same thing on the inside of the foot. When you're taking a pointed position, you may want to take a pointing and a flexing, a pointing and a flexing, so that you're able to engage and work through those feet. If you're doing where you want to circle, you can also do this on the floor if you want a non-weight bearing position to do those circles. So you can feel that sort of letting it go, letting it relax, getting it energized. I can already start to feel not just that it's relaxing and opening, but I'm starting to feel a fire in my ankles as I do this. So also continuing to do it, this is one of those dynamic stretches versus a static stretch, is that as I'm doing it repeatedly, I'm getting a nice fire within there as well. Another thing we could do in this particular position to get to the outsides of our legs, or IT bands, is we can take one leg underneath the other. We can rotate the top one. And there's two things I can do here. Is I can lift up in my hip and pull this in. Then I'm going to press down on that hip so that I get a little bit deeper into my hamstrings as well as the IT bands. Now I can pull that leg across from here and let it relax and open up. And again, I'm gonna feel those IT bands. I might feel a intense sort of tight position, or I might feel a relaxing. When I do feel that tightness, one of the things that's a really good thing to do is stay in this moment and really breathe. Send that energy into those muscles. So as I'm here, I'm feeling particularly tight within here. So I'm gonna say, and as I'm taking those breaths, I'm trying to particularly think about relaxing those muscles, letting them feel that energy, letting them feel that relaxation, so that what happens is my muscles will start to relax. They will start to feel that engagement, but also start opening to that. This also will get into the glutes. So this is a good one to really feel getting several of those different muscle groups that you may want to engage. I want to make sure that I then get to the other side. And I would start off with the exact same thing. I would think about lifting that hip in this case, and then I would try to be pulling that slightly on an angle towards my shoulder. So thinking about that shoulder connection to the hip. Then I'm going to press that hip down and let that open. And then I'm gonna let it relax over. Now, each side might be a slightly different feeling for you. So you may wanna think about how far over or across that leg is, depending on how you're feeling for that day, how you're feeling for that moment in time. So just check in. Again, one of the most important things to start feeling in a body maintenance routine is starting to really understand how your body feels and isolating those muscles that you're trying to cool down or warm up. So again, in this moment, I have a little, personally in this moment right here, I can tell you, I'm feeling more loose on this side than I was on that one. So I might not quite need to do as much of that breathing activity where I really tried to help my muscles relax. I'm already starting to feel more of a relaxed position on this side. So also, if I'm not feeling quite as much on one side versus another, I may want to increase this just a tiny bit. In this case, what I could do is I could lengthen my spine and then reach on a diagonal from here. Now, one of the things I started feeling right there, again, really trying to feel and isolate as things happen, is I feel my hip flexor a little bit more in this moment than I did on the other side. So I might want to back away from that and just adjust a teeny bit where that leg is so that I can then feel the relaxed energy within that hip flexor, and making sure that I'm really into those things that I want to be in those quads and those glutes and those different parts of the leg. So those are a couple of activities you might want to think about doing for TAP. And again, I'm going to keep reminding you on this one that it's not that the rest of your body isn't important. It absolutely is. It's just we're thinking about how those different muscle groups need to be engaged and working in a particular dance form. So we would do any of those kinds of things if we were talking about our feet. In a ballet class or in a ballet rehearsal, I might do similar things with my feet and my ankles, but then if I were particularly going to go on point, I may need to do a little bit more than that. So after I've done those different exercises where I'm engaging and I'm getting that little fire in my ankles and I'm getting the fire, I might want to roll through my feet a couple of times. I might even do a couple of tendus just to start myself off in that ballet idea. But then I'm also going to do maybe some releves or some eleves. So I might want to think about a nice deep plie, especially to start off class. I might think of this in a really slow manner. So if I think of it as I'm going to really engage that plie really nice and deeply, and I'm going to press through those ankles as I releve. I may do the same thing with just an eleve versus a releve. If I already have my pointe shoes on, I might take the toe and really think about how I'm getting all the way up to the tips of my toes, not just to the ball of the foot, but all the way up to the tips of the toes. I might do, if I were again in pointe shoes, I might go through a roll through like this, and then I would continue all the way up to my points and then return and come down, so that I'm really trying to get through and rolling through those feet. That's both good as far as working on your feet and ankles, but it also particularly for if you're doing point work. Another thing in ballet and in jazz forms, we're going to want to use our hamstrings a lot. The legs are up and we're aiming for that idea. So when we have that kind of thing where we know where our legs are going to be aiming for up in the air in some way, shape, or form, we also want to give those hamstrings a stretch. So you can either do this in a parallel position, or you can do it in a turned out position. But you want to really think, if you're turning out or if you're parallel, that you're thinking about that length of your low body, and that as you reach to the front, that you're really trying to engage the fullness of those hamstrings. So if I bend in the body, I'm going to lose a little bit of what I can get out of my stretch. So I'm going to really try to think of lengthening, lengthening, lengthening. I might even go out in a turned out position, and then I could change to a parallel position from here and just give that little extra. I could either roll through my back, or I can lengthen out from there. So I'm going to choose to roll through the back in this case, and then maybe I would do it again, or I might do it in second, or so on and so forth. For a ballet position or a jazz, I might also want to make sure that my back is getting enough of a stretch to be able to do back porto core. So I may want to do to the side and make sure that I'm there. I may want to make sure that I'm getting that up and back and in. So anything similar to what we already did on the floor, but then in thinking about engaging into those hamstrings in particular. This would be for both a ballet class or activity as well as a jazz class or activity. In jazz, one of the things we might also start thinking about, it's very similar in ballet for many things, but in addition, we might want to have some amount of hip isolations and pelvis movements. So even just a gentle sort of push and feeling of opening in that hip, just kind of going over side to side. That's one way that you can achieve that. But the other thing is you can start doing a little bit of a circle. You can also think about shifting into your hip and lengthening out of it, and frontwards and backwards. Any of these things would be great to add to the jazz forms of dance, because although it is very similar to ballet in the uprightness, the legs being an important part, we also are going to have that sort of shifting of the hips and getting a little bit into that. This also could be very much the same for a Polynesian dance form, where we are definitely going to be engaging in pelvic movements. So we can feel that same feeling of pressing over. You can feel a little bit where you're doing circles with the pelvis. Also, because you're probably not going to get as much opportunity to change it as frequently, you may want to consider doing that within your warm-up, is that you're doing several shifts of direction as you are taking that warm-up. That'll help with getting that pelvis kind of engaged and warm and feeling that fire. Also in Polynesian dance forms, you're going to be using a lot of a nice deep plie, or a bend to the knee, I should say. And we want to think that that's also going to involve those ankles, calves, things that we've done earlier within the other forms that we've already talked about. Some other forms that might have something slightly different is if you're taking a form of African dance. There's lots of different types of African forms of dance, or even in modern dance. One of the things you're going to think about is your spine and your back. So there needs to be a mobility within your spine and your back when we're taking these forms. So you may just want to start off with a opening and closing. You can do several of rolling down and rolling back up. This will give both the opportunity for your back as well as your hamstrings. If you're feeling that positioning of rolling and returning and rolling and returning, then you may want to do that sort of opening and closing, opening and closing. You may even want to think about getting into a contraction in modern so that you're feeling that engagement of your spine. And the same for different forms of African dance. You want to feel that sort of undulation of your spine. So the more that you can kind of start feeling that you're giving just a gentle warming to your back. You will also want to have a side to side stretching of that back. You may want to take it rounding over and rounding over as you have that openness of your back. So all these things, we're just thinking about how do we get that body moving in a particular way so that we are ready for the start of our activity. Again, it's really important to think of your whole body as you are warming up. But in particular dance forms, you also want to think in particular muscle groups. So start experimenting, start exploring with those different ideas. What form of dance am I doing today? What can I do to make sure that I'm achieving the fullness of that warmth in that stretch? Some other things you might want to think about is we've talked about the feet, we've talked about the ankles, we've talked about into the calves and the glutes and the quads, we've talked about the pelvis, and we've thought about the back and spine, but we haven't necessarily thought about the arms quite yet. So one of the things we can do is we can start feeling a stretch across and up and over. We can open it, feeling both back as well as front. We might think of open to the ceiling. We can also think about swinging. This is that dynamic stretch, thinking about swinging those arms. You may want to add the swing with a bounce of the knees. That can help very much for getting a nice warmth involved in the whole body. Swinging across, swinging up and down. Any of those things can really help with a nice dynamic stretch for those arms and your shoulders. You can also think about sort of this twisting side to side that will give both your back and your shoulder girdle a nice opening and start firing to it. And then as you start getting a little bit more warmth, if you know that you're going to be using your back, your shoulder girdle, and your arms a little bit more, a plank is an excellent full body preparedness. So once you feel like you've gotten quite a bit of warmth going, this would sort of be one of those last moment things of it's a really great full body, now we're ready to go moment, but you want to also have other stuff first before you get to the plank. So you can think of, I personally like to do it as a dynamic stretch, as a reaching out and reaching back up, but you can also definitely stay and do it in a static position in different ways as well. So I might think of it as rolling down. I would walk my arms out so that I'm getting that that level of feeling of connecting to the arms. I get out to a nice long sort of push-up position plank, and then I press back up and roll through. I personally would do this several times in a row and get that activity in the arms, in the back, in the hamstrings, and all that stuff going. I am going to stay out there in that little bit of a push-up position for a little while, just to give, again, that little bit extra. When I am doing a plank position, this is a really important thing to think about, is that I want to make sure that my shoulders aren't pressing up towards the ceiling, but that they're pressing out away along the shoulder line and through our elbows and reaching away through the back. So I want to really think that you're pressing down, that you're engaging in your shoulder girdle and not just having it only be your abdominals and your glutes and things like that. If you want to have a modified position, you can also be thinking about arms down on the floor, either with those palms fisted, or you can all the way down on the floor. When you take into that position, you want to check in that you're feeling that sort of connection head to tail, and thinking again about pressing down in that shoulder space. These are all things that you can think about when you are warming up. So a couple of ideas you can most definitely use, but one of the things to really check in again is think, what am I going to do? What kind of muscle groups do I need to think about? And how do I want to feel warm in this moment? So one of the things we also want to think about is the conditioning of our body. In dance, there's more and more information for dancers to understand that we need to cross-train. One of the things that sometimes can be a misperception for a dancer is, well, all I need to do is go into a class and dance, and therefore I'm ready for everything else. But that isn't necessarily the case. We do want to think about how are we making sure that our body is always ready and that there is some cross-training happening. We may need to make sure that we're doing some aerobic activity, that's sustained activity for a while. We all want to check in that those muscle groups are also getting engaged and enlivened, but we also want to check in that the whole body is being engaged, and if there's something that we're not often using, we may want to find a way of conditioning that part of your body. In addition, there are times that when we're working in a dance form, although you're using your core muscles, let's say, it doesn't necessarily mean you're using it to its fullest extent. So you may want to find a way to continue to condition your body in separate moments from class or rehearsal, finding different exercises that you might need to do. Say those eleves or releves or those lifting of those heels, that might be something you're not necessarily doing often enough that you want to do several of these, not just in a warm-up setting, but separate activity where you're really getting a chance to get that engagement. You're strengthening your ankles, you're strengthening your calves, you're strengthening into all those muscles that are involved with those rises. In addition to strengthening those things, you do want to still do those same ideas of stretching and releasing that energy when you're working on conditioning. Now that's one of the things that makes it different than a warm-up or a cool-down, is that you're thinking about how are you strengthening those muscles, not just how are you engaging them in order to complete the activity that's coming. In a cool-down, which is what we'll go into next, we want to think about what muscle groups have we already used? What things have we really worked hard for the day? And how do we relax those muscles and bring them back to a calm and a sense of peace and a sense of centered stability? So when we do a cool down, we can think we're going to kind of do a similar idea as our warm up, but in the reverse of that. We're already moving probably, we've already gotten our heart rate up pretty high, we're possibly sweating quite a bit. So we want to think about one of the things we want to do is think about how do we return to calm. So if we were to lay straight down right on the floor, we might not get to through the process of that cool down. So what we want to think about is, again, that idea of what muscle groups did I do? What muscle groups have I fully engaged? And maybe I need to start with just rolling. I might start with that same feeling of that walking out on my hands and feet, but I might take it and stop in different moments. Okay, so when we're thinking about a cool down, we may want to take many of those things we already did with the warm-up, but reverse them and start working backwards through the more vigorous into the more calm. So I'm going to take you through a series of a cool down that I enjoy. I will aim to hit on most of those groups that we've kind of already talked about, so they're a good way of bringing it back down, bringing that heart rate down as we go, still engaging, still enlivening them. Several of these could be used also on your warm-up, so these are definitely ideas that you can engage in and sort of cut and paste as needed, but I'm going to lead you through a series of a cool down that I particularly enjoy. And then after that, I'll go ahead and bring over that foam roller and show a couple of ideas on how you can engage that foam roller. So when I would finish a class, I might want a few moments to roll through my whole spine just to sort of to bring myself back into focus. If I were in a ballet class, I might possibly do this as a lengthened stretch instead of a curvy stretch. But really, either way is an important thing to do. So I may do this in any type of genre, but I could also modify as needed for whatever genre I happen to have just completed. So thinking about, I would roll through my spine and I might walk those hands out. And this time, as opposed to walking all the way out to a plank, I'd probably go to this downward facing dog position. A nice long stretch to the back. I'm thinking about a nice long stretch to the legs. I'm feeling that tailbone growing and lengthening towards the ceiling and pressing those heels into the floor. This gives me a nice stretch into the calves as well as through the back. And I'm feeling those glutes start to relax as well. I might walk my hands back at this moment in time and roll back up. And I might do that a couple of times actually, so that I feel that sense of rolling through, especially having just done a lot of activity. I'm taking this moment of the roll and the stretch as a way to start bringing my heart rate down. And return. And again, like I said, I might do that a couple of times. From there, I might take one arm and I'm gonna wrap it across. I'm gonna try not to hit my microphone here as I do this kind of stretch. And then I'm going to take that up and over. And I'm thinking about just gently pulling that elbow sort of towards the back of my head. I'm checking in that my core is still engaged throughout. And I'm really feeling that that elbow is reaching toward the ceiling, dropping my shoulder. I'm trying to make sure that my shoulder is not lengthening up towards my ear, but I'm pressing it away. And I open, I would return to the other side. I'm gonna think about pulling that arm and pressing it in towards myself. Again, I'm really gonna continue to check in with my core. I'm thinking about the length of the spine, but I'm also giving that little bit of a stretch across. As I shift to that arm up and behind me, again, I'm trying to think about pulling that elbow sort of towards my head. I'm letting those fingers drop down towards the floor and thinking about them along my spine. You can kind of see how that looks. They drop along the spine. And as I take that, I'm really trying to feel that connection. Now I'd open the arms and I might want to cross them all the way across. I'm going to hug them in towards my body. I'm thinking about wrapping myself and feeling just this connection of opening the back, feeling the scapula drop down towards the floor, wrapping it through and around. Then I can also intensify the stretch by just gently pulling that head down. And I want to be very gentle when I do this. I can also bring the head as like a little roll to the side, and I can bring it around to the other side. And again, I just want to be really gentle as I make these stretches happen. I want to feel, I probably wouldn't necessarily go all the way back in this position, but I would think about that front and side. You can do a couple of rolls as you go. And then I might open those arms. Now, as I take this next stretch, I'm thinking about lengthening through the arm, and I'm gonna just gently pull back on that palm. I'm thinking about helping myself pull in through that palm so that I can really lengthen and stretch the forearm so that I can kind of get that sense. Now I'm also gonna do the opposite of that. I'm gonna press that palm in the opposite direction and bring the fingertips down towards the floor, thinking about lengthening it. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the other side. So thinking about pulling back. I can think about it either a little bit in the fingertips, or I can also think about it really in the palm. And again, I wanna make sure that I go opposite of that as well, so that it's not just one side versus the other, but I wanna make sure that I'm getting opposite groups, opposing muscle groups as I go. So I'm giving a nice stretch to those arms. I can also do this where I can press it against the wall if I feel that I need it, or both hands together. And so I can feel that little connection with a wall help stretch. So now, as I take this next one, what I'm going to think about is rolling through the spine, kind of like what we did before, but I'm going to kind of help intensify my roll through just a little bit more, really making sure that I'm relaxing my hamstrings and I'm feeling the weight of the head dropping towards the floor. I'm going to roll through the back as I do that, also really checking in that that back is engaging. I also want to go back to those feet, so I'm going to feel that little connection of that same stretch we did kind of in our warm-up, where we're connecting the whole length of the leg. Now, one of the things I can do in this is both bend my knee, but I can also feel a little connection with my hip, so I can change the way that my stretch is happening by having a little bit of a hip tilt. So I can either go slightly back, but I also can really intensify forward into my hip flexors. So if you're finding that your hip flexors are a bit tight at the end of a class or the end of a rehearsal, this is a good one to start with and feel that little connection within there. I'm going to switch legs and get that long stretch first. Then I'm also going to let that knee bend back there. So I'm getting two different areas of those calf stretches and that little tilt. I'll even turn so you can kind of see that a little bit better. So I'm tilting in my hips just ever so slightly. I'm checking in with my core as I do that. I might want to bring the heel in a little if I need to in order to feel that shift of the pelvis, so that I can feel that hip flexor lengthening and relaxing and stretching, okay? So that's one way I can also get that hip flexor to relax. We're going to do a couple more on the floor as we do that as well. Another one we can go back to is that beginning one where we take here, and the more that we bring it in, then it's going to pull into the quads, but we also can pull it back a little bit away from us, and that's going to get into that hip flexor area. So, and again, both sides feeling that quadriceps area, and if I want to pull that slightly back and tilt that pelvis, I can feel into those muscles. Okay, now what we're going to do is we'll shift to the floor. We're going to take, again, similarly to what we did in our earlier warm-up, I'm going to exaggerate the hip off the floor this time though. So I'm going to really press my arm and leg across my body. So I'm getting a nice cross body stretch. And I'm really thinking about taking that knee into the armpit, hip all the way off the floor. My pelvis is also tilted along the spine, and I'm thinking about that length of the neck reaching out. I'm going to take that hand and I'm actually going to pull down in that hip until I've righted myself over both legs. And if I need, I can make that little adjustment of my legs just like earlier, but I might want to have it be a little bit more across as it's a more intense stretch. Now from here, as opposed to just kind of hanging out here, what I'm going to take is a long diagonal stretch. So as I go forward, I'm going to think about going on a diagonal. I'm going to still keep the back nice and long, and I'm thinking about reaching out on that diagonal. If I'm feeling a nice green light, I might go a little bit further. If I'm feeling a red light, I might come back a little bit from it, but I'm really going to try to feel like there's that length. And I'm going to come back out of it. I'm going to take this leg and I'm going to wrap it around behind me. So this is another moment where I'm going to get into those quads and hip flexor area a little bit in the glutes. So first, to start off, I'm going to have this position where I just hang out here for a moment. Then I'm going to shift to actually face the leg that's now open to the back. As I make that little shift, I'm going to do the same feeling of that pelvis tilt. I'm going to feel the abdominals engaging and feeling like they're sucking inward so that I can pull that around just a tiny bit. I'm going to reverse and from where I was, I'm going to reach around past that side. I'm going to feel like I'm wrapping myself around to the opposition. And I'm going to feel that long stretch through that hip again, but now this is on a different angle. From here, I'm going to take that leg and I'm going to reach it out to the side, and I might stretch over with my arm. I could also leave that arm If I'm feeling like I want another kind of a slightly more intense stretch, what I can also do is I can put one hand on the floor and I can reach and twist the shoulders. I want to make sure that those hips stay square on the floor. I'm thinking about as I open up, I'm keeping that engagement of the length of this leg reaching long, and I wrap myself back around. Now I'm going to take this leg slightly ahead of me, and if this leg needs to be open a little bit or if it needs to stretch, one of the things with this one is that we are reaching forward, but it's slightly different than both legs together. So think about letting that leg kind of reach out just a little bit to the side so you can focus on this leg only, reaching towards the front. And we're going to think of that same long diagonal line in the back as we reach to the front. So we really are feeling that lengthened spine. Keep breathing, making sure that you're sending relaxed energy to those legs. And then you'll come up out of that. We're going to take the other leg. So we'll wrap that one leg underneath and bring that leg across. As we do this, again, reminder that you're going to wrap that real and tight. So if you want to hold on into the elbow, that's a really great spot to feel this. You check in that you're feeling that length of that spine, again, on a nice long diagonal. The hip is actually lifted off the floor. You're thinking of that diagonal, and you're thinking of the core being engaged and the length of the spine. So that when you take this hand and this thumb into your hip, what you're doing is you're thinking about the length of the spine getting even longer. So you're going to feel grow, 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 grow as it makes that little shift and adjustment as it goes. And again, as you arrive, just check in with those hips, check in with how far across. This might depend one side to the other, right? You're not always going to be the same. So it could be that you're going to make that little shift between one side, and it might be a little different than your other side. From here, you're going to feel that long length of the spine. You want to make sure that you aren't thinking about rounding. This is a different kind of stretch. So I want to check in that you really are growing and lengthening along that diagonal. You're feeling the top of the spine as part of that neck is part of that long diagonal. As you reach, you try to find the way to send the breath into those muscles to try to let it relax. Okay, you want to really keep thinking, especially in a cool down, that your breath is going to be a really important part of that. Help your body relax. Help it bring that heart rate down and get those muscles feeling both energized, but also back to the calm and ready for the rest of the day. And we bring ourselves out of that. We take that leg back around and feel the length first to the spine. Then we shift, bringing that twist. And then as we arrive, we're going to feel that connection of your core, feeling that little bit of the, almost like a little contraction of the core, and allowing yourself to feel that, especially here, if there's a moment where you feel that there's a tightness, this is the moment to also check in that you send breath to those muscles. So if you're finding yourself a little bit tight, this is a good time to go, relax, and really focus on that one particular muscle. So in my case right now, I'm feeling it in that the backside of the quadriceps and then into the IT band. So I'm trying to just visualize those muscles, and I'm visualizing trying to release that tension. I'm going to come around to the other side and feel the length lift, and I'm just going to feel that pelvis wrapping so that it helps me get that feeling of increased stretch. This also will get into your glutes a little bit and into your low back, and even wrap up into the top a little bit. Reach that leg long to the side and we stretch over. And again, you can do a variety of arms here. You can keep that arm down. You can reach it across. You can reach towards your actual foot. If you feel that you want a little increased stretch, you can open that. You can just feel that little press with that arm and open those shoulders. Thinking about your sternum lifting towards the ceiling as you make that little shift. And then around, you're going to bring that leg in front of you. And again, if you want to keep it right underneath you, if you want to reach it out, it's going to depend on how both your hips, legs, and your knee feel in this position. One of the important things is also checking in that it's really along the line of that leg, so that as you're stretching from here, you're thinking about that growing spine and the growing leg. So you're still even feeling in this moment that the leg is reaching on that line of the foot and hip. You return from there, you're gonna add the other leg to it, and we're gonna feel that same lengthened spine. So as you go forward, we're gonna try to keep that lengthened spine, especially since this is a cool down portion. We should be able to get a nice deep stretch here. So the more that we can feel that those legs are reaching long, as well as the spine is reaching long, this will help. And this one might be one of those that you wanna do a lengthened spine first, and then round over. It'll give just a slightly different kind of stretch. If you're looking for a slightly more intense stretch here, this is a good time where if you want to flex your feet when you're low, you can take hold of your feet. You're going to think about your heels reaching out along that line, and you're going to pull the head towards your feet and grow again your spine. You're thinking about your low spine lengthening, and your head is reaching on that line, trying to think of they're going past your legs. And then you can bring them down, roll through, and up. And again, you might even want to do that one more time, but we're also going to go roll through the spine all the way down and reach out on a long, long line, fingers to toes. Okay, I'm going to make a little shift here so you can see a little bit more from the top side for this next series. So we've just stretched the body. Again, even here, we're still checking in with the core and making sure that the core is fully engaged as you take that. Then you're going to open those arms out to the side, place your feet on the floor. So from here, we're going to take our heels in one direction and our toes stay where they are. Then we're going to drop those knees in the line of those toes. You're thinking as you go, you're still keeping that back engaging on the floor. You're trying to feel just that sense of connection from your back into the floor and lengthening out along the arms. Then as you go from here, you're going to drop it a little bit further over, and you're going to make a little shelf with your arm, kind of like a 90-degree angle with that arm. And one of the reasons you're doing this is to give weight from your leg into that arm, that you can really relax this leg. I can actually move it quite a bit on my own and feel that there is that manipulation of it if I need to. I am continuing to check in with my core, and as I said just before, we are still feeling that connection of the back to the floor. Then from here, when I take this leg, I'm going to swing it down, and I'm going to bring those heels back to center. I'm going to take that same leg that I just went in that direction with. I'm going to place it over the top. I'm going to take one hand through the center line, one hand on the outside, and I'll just thread them together and reach this towards my chest. As I feel that connection of it opening towards my chest and pulling, I'm going to keep feeling those hips staying square. So as we're really trying to make sure that we're connecting this moment, is we're still feeling that connection of our head tail and our little box between our hips and our shoulders. Keep checking in with your breath. And I'm going to release those hands. I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to take that same leg and I'm going to press it underneath. I'm going to take that opposite hand and I'm going to reach around and take hold of my big toe from that leg. As I do this, I'm going to check in with my center, and I'm going to feel the length of the knee reaching down past my body and reaching past along that line. I'm going to bring this arm up so that I can try to think of the connection of your fingers all the way down to that knee. And again, this is a good moment to just check in that you're not holding tension in any of those muscles, that you're engaging, but you're also letting them relax. You want to try to feel that there's that relaxing, so that as you're stretching, it's allowing yourself to actually feel the fullness of the stretch. I'm going to release that leg and bring it back out. Those arms go out to the side. And we'll do the opposite side, so those heels are open and the leg swings and across, and make that little shelf. In this position, if you want to have it be bent, that's one place you can start. You can also intensify it just a little bit by lengthening that leg, but really just remind yourself that what you're trying to do here is engage in a relaxed way. So we're not trying to necessarily use this as a full stretch. This is a cool down, so we want to check in with that. And swing that leg down and around. Now you're going to use that same leg and cross it over. You're going to think of one hand through, one hand on the outside. Thread those hands together. And as you're in this position, this is actually one that's a really good one to make little adjustments if you want to. So you can feel that little pull. But if I bring my knee, this knee, just a little tiny bit off that line, as long as I'm really engaging my core, if I bring it just a little bit, I'm going to give my other leg just a tiny bit of a different stretch. Same thing, if I let myself go into that leg just a little bit, I'm going to be able to feel just a tiny different stretch. In addition to moving it side to side, I actually can also just a tiny bit rotate those hips and shift just a touch. So this is a great place to feel a couple of very minute changes between one position and another, where it might be all you need to get into just that perfect spot. Take that leg down. That leg that we had is going to slide underneath. We're going to take hold of that big toe. We'll feel that length of the arm along that line, reaching through the fingertips all the way down through that knee. Again, keep checking with your core as you go. And we'll open that back up, release that leg. You can even hug your both legs in at this moment if you wish, if you're finding that you need just that little extra. We are going to roll on to one direction or the other. I'm going to roll over, and I would roll to this position, but I'm going to just adjust myself so you can see me in a little different angle, but I would stay right where I was. So we're going to go into a child's pose. We can bring those arms back behind you, or if you wish, you can have them just a little in front of you, or especially where we're at right now in terms of things, if you wanted to place your hands just gently underneath your forehead, you can do that too. The only thing with this one is just pay attention that you haven't changed your spine too much, that it's not either letting your neck rotate out or that it's not pulling it up a little bit. So that's the one thing to think about with this. From here, I'm going to just take my hands to where my shoulders would be and help myself press up into hands and knees. And as I take this position, what I'm going to think about is giving that equal weight and checking in again with my core. I'm going to take one hand off the floor and I'm going to lace it through the other side, and I'm going to spiral my back. I'm going to think about placing just above that shoulder on the floor. In this position, what I'm getting is a nice back stretch. I'm feeling it into the shoulder girdle area, but I also really want to make sure that both my core is fully engaged, and I have a lot of pressure in this hand right here. I can actually move this hand quite freely, right? Because I'm really pressing into this hand so that I take off any of that pressure from my actual shoulder. I just want to make sure that I'm giving a little bit of energy to it, but not pushing or letting my weight fall into the floor. As I come up, I'm going to use a lot of energy through that hand to put that hand down. I'll switch to the other side. Thread it through and spiral that back. Feeling like that connection is happening. Check in with your core. Again, lots of energy through that hand that's helping press through the floor. If you're finding that this one bothers your knees, you can modify this one to either be standing and doing this along the wall, or you can feel that as you make that twist, you can either do it in this positioning, or you could even, you're not going to get the same connection on the actual floor, but you can bring that around. You're going to feel a slightly different stretch in that moment. Okay, so after there, I'm going to tuck those toes, bring those hips up. One more time, just that feeling of that downward facing dog. Not lots of energy through the hands, lots of energy through the feet. And you can walk your hands to your feet or your feet to your hands. And then as you come up, you might want to roll with a slightly bent knee. Again, hopefully by this point, you've kind of relaxed quite a bit. So you have a nice dropping energy. Okay, so one of the other things we talked about was the idea of using tools. A foam roller is a really great tool to use for that little extra tightness in a muscle. We can use this either in a warm-up or in a cool down, and you can use it in a variety of ways. So one of the things you want to think about is that you're going away from that center body when you're using your foam roller, and you can use it in a more intense way, or you can also try to back off of it with how much weight and pressure you're putting into it. So if you were to use it like against the wall, you're gonna get a lot less of a pressure into it than if it were on the floor. So one of the things you can do is that as you're taking that roll through, I can just press in, and I can use it in a particular spot where maybe it's not pushing so hard, where we just kind of have a nice little easy feeling to it. Okay, so if we're thinking about using my rolling along the back, right? But then if I wanted to use it on the floor, I can intensify my stretch and intensify my working through those muscles ever so slightly. So from here, as I take to the back, what I would try to think about is that as I press my weight into the floor, that allows me to have a bit more where it's feeling that connection through those muscles. And one of the trickiest parts about doing a foam roller is that you can't just sort of like lay there and let it go. You actually have to engage your core quite a bit. So you want to check in with that. As you go into different areas, you want to think about what kind of support do you need. So I can kind of get into one area here, but if I were to try to get a little bit higher, I'd have a harder time. So I might need to get off and actually use the legs and the hands to go through that roller. One of the places that I find a lot of dancers have tension is in those IT bands, the side part of our leg. And this is a great place to really help work through some of that. So when you do something of like the leg, you want to think as if this were the leg itself, that you're going to work one area of it, but then you also want to get all the little parts along the sides too. So when you make that feeling of using that foam roller, you work on one, and then you might also need to angle yourself slightly differently. And I'm doing a little bit faster here, and slightly differently, so that you're getting into those places and still thinking of the same as we've been talking about with our cool down of opposition, and not just the one that makes the most noise, but also all of them that are going to help contribute to relaxing that whole muscle area and muscle group. So a foam roller, super helpful tool, great one to have for your cool down, for your conditioning, for your work. Another option in tools is little tennis ball type ideas. And there's lots of different ways that you can use this. You can have just a regular tennis ball that we would use, kind of a harder ball. This is like, I don't even know what kind of ball this is, but it's a little bit harder. And then this is two tennis balls together in a sock. This kind of thing will help a lot with like in your feet. You can use it, but in addition, if you wanted to have just one to roll along the foot, they're gonna get little different areas. If you need a little harder, that's great. So one of the things a ball will do differently than the foam roller is the foam roller will disperse it just a little bit more, whereas this is gonna really get into one particular area. So if you're finding that you have a specific spot that's particularly troublesome for the day, you might wanna use a ball in that particular area. Or for smaller muscle groups like the feet, these are also really, really great. If you don't have a tennis ball or a ball of some sort like that, actually just a water bottle is also a great way for at least for your feet or smaller muscle groups, your calf, something like that. If you can like on the floor, you can use that. So those are all really great ideas for using tools to help with your cool down or your warm-up, whatever else you might need them for. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, the development of a personalized body maintenance routine. I hope that you're able to use these tools to really truly find your own way of warming up and cooling down and finding what is best for your body to have the longest life as a dance professional. That can mean lots of different things, like we'll see in our next part of the web series on careers in dance. But one of the things that's the most important is making sure that you're taking care of your body so that you really can get the most out of what you're capable of. I hope you've enjoyed this class, and I really thank you for being a part of it.